Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham. I am joined by editor Bob Ferrante and two very special guests who will be joining us on a regular basis during the season. Former FSU offensive lineman and college football coach Mark Salva, and FSU alum and Tampa sports radio host JP Peterson. And guys, I'm glad that you guys are here. We're glad, we're happy to know that you guys are probably going to join us or are going to try to join us every Tuesday at 3:00 during the season, Mark and JP, and we're going to break down what we've seen from Florida State the previous week, give JP and Mark a chance to share with us what they think. And then obviously we're also going to piggyback that on top of a takeaways article I do every Tuesday called Takeaway Tuesday. But guys, we are finally here. It is game.
Can't wait.
JP is getting ready. JP, tell everybody what are you getting ready to do?
I'm getting ready to take off for Dublin. I'm going to Dublin, Ireland. We're going to be doing my show live Thursday and Friday. Thursday, we're going to be at the William Floyd Bar None Foundation event at Fitzsimmons in Temple Bar. So if you're in Dublin, come on over to Fitzsimmons and Temple Bar. I think it's $50 for the private party. You're going to have food and drinks and then whatever else you want to drink, but we'll be having lots of Seminoles there. I'll be doing a show live there on Thursday, and then Friday we're TBA, looking for a watering hole somewhere in Temple Bar to do it. We'll see where everybody's gathering. They got an event like at the racetrack, so I didn't want to head out there. So we'll be doing it from some drunken pub in Ireland where there'll be hundreds of Seminoles. So just looking forward to it. Maybe I can get Kirk Herbstreit to stop by. You think?
Yeah, good luck with that. I would like to see that conversation.
A bit of rotten tomatoes near you.
Hey, maybe you get Fine Bomb to stop by if you do.
Oh my God, how good would that be?
I want to stop by
good
for a
would
little
that
bit if you get him.
I don't know how they get his ears in the frame, man. I just do not know how that even works from a television standpoint. It's so weird.
Yeah, well, I said, we talked. Obviously, if JP and I are referring to a conversation we had yesterday on his show, Paul Feinbaum has come out and said some very negative things about Florida, crying about the postseason ban,
Trail of Tears.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, and as I was telling JP yesterday, there's literally nobody in college football or covers college football whose opinion I respect less than Paul Feinbaum. So I mean. He may listen. They need to send him back to Birmingham, put him in a radio station, and let him do the SEC thing. His views on college football.
Honk.
He is trying to get clickbait, and he does. He tries to be a shock jock. But anyway, that's where that conversation came from. But Mark, we haven't seen you since last season. I think. Well, we didn't do anything after the Georgia game last year. There was no first impressions, so we haven't not seen you since the post Florida game last year.
Georgia game.
What is going on? Actually, yeah, we saw you after the ACC championship game, I believe. So anyway, It's been since December since we've seen you on sidelines, Mark. What's been going on? I know you're getting ready to do the same thing and head to Dublin as well.
Yeah, I leave tomorrow. I'll get there Thursday. My wife Julie and I, we have obviously a bunch of friends and stuff there. We're gonna hang with some folks, and Friday and Saturday is nothing but Knoll football. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Looking forward to see the unveiling of this team and what the year is going to bring us. I'm jacked. I really am.
Yeah, and listen, we got even more jacked on Sunday when Mike Norvell released the depth chart for Florida State, and we got to see what he thinks of this personnel by where they are in this depth chart. It was there were some surprises. There were some things that were pretty much chalk what they thought they would be. And of course, we'll start with the offensive side of the ball, guys. This is considered the bridge year for Florida State. They have brought in DJ U. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name. That's why. There you go.
There we go.
And obviously, he was named the starter. It was everybody expected. Listen, no surprise there. That's why they brought him in here to get Brock and Luke ready for next year. Listen, Bob, I'll ask you because I put in my takeaways article that I was hoping I would see more separation between DJ and Brock or Luke. And I've got some questions about the quarterback position going in. I think Florida State could be good. Just because you say I've got questions is not necessarily negative. Just what were your thoughts on the quarterback battle as you saw it play out? And really wasn't much of a battle, but did you expect to see more separation between those two guys?
Yeah, I think we all expected DJU to be more of a plug-and-play type of quarterback, but throughout his career, I mean, he tried to plug in at Oregon State, and I think he did well as far as stretching the field, but there were also too many interceptions in a lot of his games over there. Like, he had 2 picks against Washington in a 22-20 game where you think Oregon State could have been in a position to pull off that upset if he takes care of the ball a little bit better. I would call the passing game erratic at best for most of camp. I thought it was very up and down, but it got better in the last week or so. If you're trying to find positives among the macro, we kind of live in a micro world throughout camp. You take each camp day and look at it micro, but the macro, the last week or so was much better. Was it polished? Did it look incredible? Were there no drops? No, it wasn't that, but it was better. Yeah. So I think from that standpoint, yes, it looked good. Is Brock Glenn a guy for the future? We talked about DJU being the bridge guy all along since New Year's Day. DJ is the bridge guy, but I think Brock is a guy who's got a ton of talent, really gifted passer, can scramble. We've made the Casey Weldon comparison. There's a lot there in terms of what Brock can bring. We want to see a roadmap for how Brock gets on the field this season too, right?
Yeah, and I want to ask JP because he played quarterback. JP, I've made the argument that what he has his playing time in this season, if they want to get him ready for next season, has to come in meaningful reps, right? It can't come just in 2 blowout games at the end of the season, whether it's Charleston Southern or Cal. It just can't come in those 2 games to get him ready for next year. They don't practice the way teams did when you and I played. There's not really live football except for the scrimmages. I think they've got to get him in when it counts.
Well, Mark, you'll remember, and Bob, you probably remember as well, all you guys, that there was a time when Bobby used to, bring in that second string quarterback, because it was always a close battle, whether it be Casey and Brad or Peter Tom or any of those back in that day, and that they would want to get that next guy ready, and they'd come in the second quarter. There'd be a special package for them, and they'd get some meaningful reps. And I think that's absolutely what they should be doing with Brock. I don't think many teams do that anymore. It's probably a little bit more radical, but I think the coach has got to feel this out and get him some meaningful reps. I would agree with you 100%. And I think we saw, at least I saw, flash enough. I'm not at practice, and you guys have a much better perspective of that. But what I saw in the game, there's a lot to work with. And Brock is a talented young player, but I would love to see him get some meaningful snaps. Absolutely.
Yeah. And listen, we're not going to sit here. We're not
doing it in the Clemson game, but or Miami.
Well, and as Bob said, sometimes we have a tendency to be hypercritical because we haven't seen this. What we see is practice. We don't see scrimmages when they're playing live tackle football. And listen, talking about Brock's not. We've seen DJ's got the ability to push the ball downfield. He's got the ability to be a difference maker in the quarterback run game, particularly quarterback power, quarterback draws, those type of things. He is going to be able to push the ball downfield. And I think that Mike Norvell will figure out a way to be successful with him and work, to a certain extent. We'll get into the receivers in a second, certain extent around there. But, the defense dominated most of camp, and Bob will agree to that. We saw some days where the offense just could not do anything. And to me, the lazy narrative is, well, the defense is so good, the offense wasn't going to do anything to begin with. Well, last year we saw an offense that was pretty good, supposed to be pretty good going into the season, against a defense that was pretty good going into the season, and that offense had some days where it dominated that defense. So, and this is not all about the defense. This is not all about the receivers. Some of the struggles that FSU has had in offense this year has been because of the inconsistency at quarterback or lack of efficiency, I guess. But Mark, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you went against a lot of good defenses, a lot of good offenses when you played here. And my argument would be, if FSU's offense is so good up front, shouldn't they find some wins? And maybe they did in scrimmages. We didn't get to see them.
Yeah. So the thing you got to remember about Brock too, the picture we have of him is those games last year. he was hurt a lot in the middle of the year. And when he finally ended up playing, he was a rookie, true rookie in every sense of the word. So that snapshot that we have as fans and observers of the program, we see those last couple of games against Louisville and Florida and the other game. He was thrust into an impossible situation. So I got to discount that and just trust your guys' eyes, what you've seen all year, in that he's made progress. And, with DJ, you got a guy that has a ton of experience. Now, watching him when he was at Clemson and a little bit when he was at Oregon State, I think he is what he is, right? It doesn't sound like, he's going to miraculously all of a sudden be this guy who's going to see things, read things really quick, be super duper accurate. He probably has improved in that stuff over the course of several years, but he is what he is. And look, I trust Mike enough to know how to handle that. And the thing I think, in terms of the total offense, to your point about going against a good defense is a little bit ahead, but last year's team was really 2 years in the making, if you think about it, right? I mean, it was. We watched Jordan Travis and that offense grow over the course of 2 years, and now we're starting again, and we're going to see the snapshot on Saturday of what this offense looks like. But I like the pieces around it, in it, and we're going to see it, whatever it is on Saturday. I have great confidence it's going to grow and get better through the course of the year, because that is the track record of a Mike Norvell coach team.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged as far as that part of it goes, knowing that, this is under the stewardship of really an elite offensive coach.
Well, yeah, and listen, we talked a little bit about yesterday. I think that one of the biggest differences between this year's offense and last year's offense, well, there's two. I think last year's offense knew exactly who it was going into the season. I think this year's offense is going to find its identity as it goes through the season, right? And this year's offense is going to go through the offensive line, where last year's offense went through the skill position players: Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, Trey Benson. So I do think, and listen, when you bring in a new quarterback that has not been, JT was in the system for 3 years when he entered that fall camp last year. DJU's only been in Mike's system for a year. I do think as I put it in my article, it's the bridge is under construction, right? It hadn't been totally finished yet. There's work to be done and progress to be made. Listen, we hear all the time, it's about the standard, right? It's about the standard. Well, the standard was set last year. All we're doing is comparing each position group to the standard that was set last year. And that is the benchmark right now. And so when we have these discussions, and listen, you don't want to be overly critical, but you got to be honest about what you see. And our comparison is what we saw from FSU's offense last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Briley was just not meant to be a negative discussion. It's meant to be an analysis of what we've seen. Nobody sat here and said that Florida State's going to be bad on offense, right?
Well,
Nobody said that.
What I'll say is, from my reading of the tea leaves here, is, to me, this offense is going to be as good as the receivers allow it to be. Now, that's not saying everything's depending on these receivers. I think, and it's one thing I learned from Brady when he was here, is that a football season is a evolution, and it's all about getting better each and every week, breaking down that tape, see where you're deficient, making the adjustments, and players getting better. And first game, I don't expect the wide receivers to be great, but they've got to get better each and every week and that will determine how wide open this offense could be. Listen, I think the running game of this offensive line can beat a lot of teams. Now, the great teams, you got to be more balanced, right? You've got to be able to use the entire field against a really good defensive football team. So I want to see these receivers start to grow each and every week, and then Mike getting more and more comfortable with putting more on them. And I think that's going to be the determining factor on how good this offense can be. And these players they're not going to be great week one, but they'll get used to catching the ball in the crowd. Hopefully that's where the greatness shows in receivers. Everybody can catch a wide open ball. Well, we hope. I've seen some of your reports, but hopefully they'll learn to catch the ball in traffic as they go along. And that's where I think the kind of the hit and miss of this offense will be.
Well, I think there's one aspect that we don't talk about, and that is in Jordan Travis, who has risen to one of my favorite all-time Seminoles, and I think I feel that way, is the leadership, that the leadership void that is gone on the side of the ball, especially with the absence of Jordan Travis. You know, I know a lot of people were saying, you know, how good it was that DJ didn't go to ACC media days, and you know that other people maybe deserve to go. And I think, yeah, that was a nice thing. But also in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I sure would like that guy to say, I'm taking this team and put him on my back, and I'm going to lead. You know, so to me, there's, you know, where's that leadership on that side of the ball going to come from? There's, you know, Darius Washington for sure. You know, so that offensive line, those senior offensive linemen, you know, are going to have to take that mantle and drop, you know, through their will and their refusal to get beat, really take hold of this offense, because that came from Jordan Travis last year, and it was infectious, and it really permeated through the whole team. And that's a huge vacuum, and that's a rare thing. So how do we make up for that?
Well, yeah. And listen, you know, go back to what JP was saying about the receivers needing some time to develop. And, you know, we all agree with that. And I think listen, Mike's big on in-season development. I think everybody's big on it's in-season development, really. I mean, we just hear Mike talk about it more than we hear some coaches talk about it. But one of the reasons they're going to have a chance, as you mentioned it, the offensive line and the running back room. Now, the running back room is an embarrassment of riches. So we really think that we're going to see a ton of guys get a ton of carries. Roydell Williams and Lawrence Toafili are named as the starters, or really co-starters, because they're listed in two different running back slots. But they'll be in the two running backs. They'll be in the game at the same time, and obviously they'll be rotating in 11 personnel. And you know, we talked about it yesterday. We'll see Lawrence in the slot a lot. He's got some of the best hands on the team. There are some people that are surprised he was not moved to slot receiver more often. Bob and I have talked about that a lot, and we'd like to see that.
Yes.
But listen, but you got we've seen it. You know, then you got your Jalen Lucas, who I think is going to have a chance to be a Deuce Vaughn type player for Florida State. If you remember, Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State a couple of years ago had a big year for the Kansas State and ended up being drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. You know, he has been really fun to watch. He's easy to cheer for. He's one of the smallest guys you're going to see in college football this year, one of the fastest guys you're going to see in college football this year. And he's a tough little guy. He'll run through the middle, but he's listed as 5'9". I'll give him 5'7". But listen, he's been a highlight film in practice, and I think, you know, how Mike's going to use him and Lawrence to probably help out that wide receiver core. You know, I think you got to almost call them co-wide receivers to some extent, because we've seen both of them flanked outside, as Mike likes to do. You know, motion them out to the slot, those kind of things. And then Keziah Holmes, Sam Singleton, and Cam Davis have all flashed at times. Bob, how do they find enough carries for all these guys?
I went through the history of Mike Norvell, how he's used running backs. I mean, really, the answer is you have a 3-man running back by committee. A fourth guy is going to get some touches. There's going to be injuries, other factors there. Then you have to look to special teams. How can you get a guy in a return capability? We know Jalen Lucas is going to get some opportunities there, whether it's punt or kick return. I want to see Jalen Lucas touch the ball 100 times by the end of the Florida game and figure it out. However it's broken down, rushing, receiving, returning, that guy's got to touch the ball. I mean, period. He's a game changer. The rest of it, I'll be very curious. Like, can Cam Davis be a pass protector and get playing time early? Mekhi Danzy with that speed, what does it look like? There were days where Sam Singleton looked like a completely different guy from last year. There were days where Keziah Holmes looked phenomenal. Not everybody's going to be happy. That's going to be the bottom line of it. But you got some great options.
Yeah, and I want to go back and answer Bradley's question, because I want to understand what I'm saying. He says that it's negative because I said DJU has not separated himself as much as from. Well, I don't think that's negative. I don't. I mean, you can look at that two ways.
Yeah.
You know. Listen. Is it if Brock is? I mean, if DJU's the definitive starter, by any matter of degree, and Brock is closer to him than I expected. That's probably a good thing for Florida State if something happens to DJU or Mike tries to get Brock more playing time. But when you bring in I guess what I'm trying to say is I thought because they chose to bring DJU in instead of letting Brock and Luke compete for the job or bringing in a veteran to be a backup to Brock, I thought there would be more separation. Now, that's not negative. That's analysis. I could sit on here and say they're going to go 16-0, win the national championship if you want me to, but that's selling and that's not analysis. So anyway, it wasn't meant to be negative. It was meant to be what it was. It was meant to be explain what we saw during camp.
It's constructive. It's constructive criticism. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, and it's the same thing the coaches are doing when they watch these guys and practice it in film. There's a lot of guys that'll wave the pom poms for you if that's what you want them to do. They're all over the place, as JP and I were talking about.
I'm not interested in that. No, we want analysis. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about the receivers and listen. We've talked about the fact that they need to have in-season development. Listen, when you lose Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, who was more of a wide receiver and a tight end, and then Trey Benson, who was your fifth leading receiver on the team, if my memory serves me right. So you've lost, I think, 4 of your top 6 or 4 of your top 5 receivers from last year. Listen, we've seen flashes, right, Bob? We've had days where we walked out of there and go, wow, how did Malik Benson not play it more at Alabama? Wow, Kentron Portier looks like he's turning the corner. Hakeem continued to have some strong practices early, like he did, finish the season with flashes. I think we probably wanted to see Ja'Kai had kind of up and down camp, but he finished camp strong. We heard Mike talk about that. Deuce is kind of an enigma. We'd like to see more consistency out of him. He's freakishly tall, got great speed, and just needs to be more consistent. And then, listen, we saw Elijah Moore at times did not look like a true freshman early in camp. I think he kind of got some camp legs as camp got deeper. But I think we see, and we saw Darian Williamson have a really good practice one day. We just have not. In my opinion, Bob, we just didn't see enough guys stacked back-to-back days, as they like to say. But just what are your overall thoughts? And we've said we think they'll develop. But what are your thoughts on the depth chart at wide receiver as we enter the season?
Yeah, we've often used the term dependable. Who's dependable going into the season? And I think after Malik Benson, you start to say, well, there are pass catchers who are dependable, but they're not wide receiver by job title. So you start thinking about Toafili, Morlock, Jalen Lucas, and not necessarily going through the list of receivers. So that's where I don't get kind of too freaked out from a passing game standpoint, because there are guys who can catch the ball. It's just getting that Darian Williamson to stack some good days. I thought Kentron had a really good last week to 10 days in particular as another example. They have candidates. It's getting them to be consistently dependable. I wasn't surprised by the depth chart. I think maybe Jaylen Brown didn't have the very best camp from start to finish, but some of his better days, some of his better reps look really, really good. That feels like a guy who they are, I think, pushing pretty hard to be in the mix. And let's be honest, Mike Norvell coaches the receivers hard in practices. I mean, he is on everybody's butts, and he wants them to be better. You're darn right. Elijah Moore is going to be fantastic. It may not look like it this year. Luane McCoy, his footwork, it's going to be good. I think if you're buying stock early, and some of the guys that we've seen through like Luane in camp, Elijah in camp, those are some early guys. So again, it's candidates. It's just give me that kind of dependable, I can expect it from you consistently.
Yep. Yeah,
I think one of the things too you got to consider about wide receivers is the job description is not just catching the football and running routes, right? You're talking about the total package blocking. We're going to probably run a lot of screens and a lot of bubble passes to the backs to Jalen Lucas and whatnot. We talked about those guys got to be able to block too. Those guys got to hustle and compete. I think when you look at this depth chart, I think maybe what it reflects is you're looking at guys who, all things being equal, who are the guys who compete? Who are the guys who and you guys can tell me, you guys have been at practice and seen these guys. I look at a guy like Jalen Brown, I'm thinking that must be a guy who must compete, even though he may not catch everything. He's gonna go compete. To me, if you do that, you got a chance. Because, like I said, the job description is more than just catching the ball and running routes.
Well, the one thing I will say this: the one thing I've noticed about Malik Benson, number one, he seems like a great kid. Like he'll walk by you and dap you up as he's going from drill to drill. But what you do see with Malik is he is constantly talking to the other receivers about routes, about breaks. I mean, you see him walking from from the indoor to the outdoor when they're switching periods, and he's got the ability to take the top off of defense. I think we all know that. And listen, I think sometimes we overreact to the fact that he didn't play much at Alabama. Listen, there's a lot of guys that didn't play much at Alabama last year. They're pretty damn good. They've probably got arguably one of the top 3 rosters in all of college football, at least did last year. So there are a lot of guys that didn't play there last year. That's why a lot of them left, and they got opportunities at any other places. But listen, and we know Jakai's a playmaker. We saw enough of that in the Pitt game last year where he really took over that game. There wasn't a whole lot of offense that day on the other side of the ball besides Jakai. And we've seen him make some acrobatic catches. You can line them up in a lot of different spots. And I do think this is a group that's going to grow as the season goes on. And, and listen, we know that if the running game's successful, which it should be, it's going to open up opportunities in the pass game and kind of give this passing offense time to grow, for lack of a better term. Now, I can tell you who the safety – I can tell you who DJU's favorite guy is and Brock Glenn's favorite guy is and Luke Cromerhawk's favorite guy is. It's number 84. It's Kyle Morlock. That guy is in line for a big year, Bob, based off what we've seen in practice. He is going to get his catches from last year and probably Jaheim's catches from last year. I'm thinking that if we had to bet on who the leading receiver is going to be for Florida State this year, I think it's going to be Kyle Morlock.
Dang. Okay.
Wow. Okay. That's bold. I might go Jalen Lucas over Morlock, but I will say this for a guy who from Blairsville, Georgia, who was almost non-recruited as a high school wide receiver, gets developed at a D2 school as a tight end, and then lands at Florida State over Tennessee. This is a really cool story for a guy who could be a big piece of an offense. Pat, we've talked about, we love this concept of the multi-year transfer, the stash and develop type of transfer. It's not just a plug and play kind of Mike Norvell's known for grabbing a transfer and just plugging him in. It's not talent development. Kyle Morlock is talent development by this staff. And I think they should earn some credit for pushing him into being a better route runner, into being a better blocker. If he can be that all-around guy, that's a big thing. I don't know how I feel about him yet in the blocking part of the game. Not being able to see the scrimmages enough. I want to see, is he farther ahead than last year? But if he is, that's a big if. I think that's a huge win for Florida State that they've got Kyle ready for that expanded role.
Yeah, and of course the big question at the tight end position is who is behind him, right? I mean, so we saw Brian Courtney and or Jackson West listed as the backup. They got Courtney listed at 240. I hope he is. He has looked better. Jackson. The thing that surprised, I think Jackson West could surprise some people as a pass catcher this year. He came out of high school listed as a tight end, but he hardly ever lined up as a unit tight end. He was always a slot or the outside receiver. Now he's the biggest tight end. I think he's about 250. They got him listed at 235. There's no way I don't think that's correct. But anyway, he looks bigger than that to me. But I will say this, we've noticed that Brian Courtney has gotten better. I think he's still somewhat limited because of his size as a blocker. I would say he's probably more 225 than 240. But Bob, were you surprised? The guy that we thought we might see on this tight end depth chart, because he never drops a pass, is Amari Williams. Now, I think I understand why. He came out of high school a year early. I don't think any of us expected to see what we saw out of Amari in camp this year. Were you surprised that he was not listed as a part of the tight end depth chart?
I wonder if this is a decision to kind of cautiously watch his progression and understand that he's not a tight end by what he did in high school. He was a flexed out receiver, a 4-star defensive end who was reclassified and is in college a year early. what will happen when the lights come on at Aviva Stadium or Doak Campbell Stadium, because his first scrimmage wasn't good by Mike Norvell's estimation, but he said that the next day, that next Monday, that first practice back, it was much, much better. Amari understood what he had done wrong. The corrections, to some extent, have been learned and understood. I think there's a role for Amari. How fast is it? I don't think you're going to redshirt this guy. I think he's going to play more than 4 games. My question is, does it come around week 5 or week 6? When do we start to see more from a guy like Amari?
Yeah, listen, I think part of that, and I wasn't there, but just having been a freshman in college, remember what it was like to go through my first scrimmage against a full-grown man as opposed to another high school kid. It can be somewhat shocking to the system. And I'm sure that was the physicality was a little bit different than a lot of those freshmen thought, when especially kids that were not here in the spring. I think that can be a shock to your system. You realize how big and how strong these other guys are when it's, strain yourself on 11-on-11 tackle football, right? So I think that's part of it. But listen, the kid's got great hands. I think there's an interesting fight coming next spring to see what side of the ball he ends up on, because he could obviously be a –
Don't need to rush it.
Yeah. So, but listen,
long way to go.
I had no idea that he was going to be anywhere near as good as he is as a true freshman at tight end. I think you could I think it's safe to – Bob, would you say that from what we saw during practice, he is one of the more consistent pass catchers on Florida State's roster going into the season?
Absolutely. And honestly, doesn't wear gloves.
No.
Catches the ball cleanly without gloves. It's really – he's got natural skills. Dad played in the NFL, all that good stuff, but works hard. It's a natural pass-catching look.
Well, yeah. Pat, before I take my 3-hour leave for the TSA line in Orlando Airport, I just want to say I'm very confident that Mike Norvell is going to have this team ready to play. We've seen it the last 2 years in big openers against LSU. They've played really, really good, great football. They played great football, and they were ultimately prepared for those games, which is not something that many teams can say. And I'm confident that Mike Norvell will have this transfer portal class to the level of every other one, because he knows how to get teams ready. So I think it's going to be a fun game to watch. Am I a little nervous? Sure. But the nerves will go away with those 4 Guinness before the game. The players will have something else to use. I don't know.
If there's an over under a 4, I'm taking the over on that, JP.
That is. It's going to be a night game. That's true. So for us in Dublin. So I'm very confident he'll have them ready to play. And I can't wait to see how this team evolves through the season, because I think it's going to be so much better, in week Florida than it will be in week 1. I think it's going to be pretty damn good in week 1. So I'm excited. Can't wait.
Yep. It'll be a fun season, JP, and we will see you next Tuesday to get your thoughts on post Georgia Tech. So we'll see you then.
Hopefully somewhat not hungover.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. You got a long
jet lag.
Yeah. Enjoy that. Enjoy that. All right.
Save me a spot at the bar, JP.
See you, man. I'll see you in Dublin, Mark. See you there.
See you.
Yep, and Henry, we've said Courtney has looked better than he ever has before, and just got to see more of Jackson West would be the best way I could put it, as we go. But obviously, he finished last year strong. He had a great block against Florida that everybody remembers, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully that is right. All right, so Mark, let's get to your favorite position on the field now, and the strength of FSU's offense.
Are we done with intramurals now?
Yes, we are done with intramurals. Now we're moving on to the big boys. We got this could shoot a lot of people, me included. I think this has a chance to be the best FSU offensive line we have seen in, golly, Bob, pre-Taggart.
Since 2013-14, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, and I remember when Mike came out and said that, he thought Darius Washington might compete for All-American honors, and I'm like, well, we got some preseason talk going on, and then we get to camp. And I love Darius. I mean, listen, he's a hard guy not to cheer for. He's been a great teammate, a great role model for the other offensive linemen. Boy, was Mike right. I mean, you watch him practice, and I put in my takeaways that he's found his post at left tackle. Hopefully, they will not have to move him anywhere. this season. Hopefully they're deep enough across the other 4 positions that he can stay right there. But he looks to be it looks like he's going to have his best season as a Florida State offensive lineman. Bob, what do you think about him going into the year?
Yeah, so I think I was there when Mike Norvell started the Darius Washington kind of All-America pitch. And I think it was over in Amelia Island. He said it later, I think, over in Jacksonville to the booster club there. And when he's doubling down, when a head coach is messaging in that way, I think it really sends quite the message to the fans that he has seen the work that a guy like Darius has done. And I should say Kurt Weiler's done a really nice story we just published on the Osceola just about guys like Darius, Maurice Smith, Rob Scott. They bought in early to the entire process of development, sticking with Coach Norvell, sticking with Coach Atkins, not wavering in what was going on here and sticking it through a lot of the losses. So these are cool developmental success stories, again, that I don't think Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins get a lot of credit for, because, again, the viewpoint is you bring in a transfer and you plug in somebody. A lot of guys that they have developed day in and day out to be in this position for these guys as redshirt seniors.
Yeah, and then his backup, talk about another developmental guy, Lucas Simmons. I think you could see some sliding going around if you had to move Darius. Lucas is listed as the second-team offensive tackle at left tackle. And listen, he is leaps and bounds ahead of where he was last year, Bob. I don't know how much of the one-on-ones and things of that. We're at 2 different locations during practice. But this kid, if you're a Florida State fan, you got to like who may be the heir apparent to Darius Washington at left tackle next year. He is 6'8", 308 pounds, extremely long arms. And when he establishes inside hands with those long arms, you are not getting around him. I've been very impressed with Lucas's development. I think he'll be a guy that they'll try to get some reps in games that are taken care of. I do think that possibly a Robert Scott could be the primary backup, or Jalen Early, or we'll talk about Chris Otto a lot this year. But certainly you feel good about where you are at left tackle between Darius, Lucas Simmons, and Robert Scott and Chris Otto and some other guys. Left guard, I didn't know what to think when they brought in Richie Leonard from Florida. I looked at his PFF numbers. Those numbers were much better against the run game versus the pass game, but he's been better than I thought, Bob. He is a tough guy, a mauler. It looks like he has established himself as a starting left guard, and I think that it'd be tough for somebody to outplay him from what we've seen. But listen, played a lot of football at Florida, and has really been. I thought he had an impressive camp.
Yeah, I didn't expect Richie to be that good, especially in the run game. But you're right. I think that's his true strength. When we watch him also in those one-on-ones, as he's trying to maybe backpedal and keep a defensive tackle in front of him, that's a tough ask when it's Darrell Jackson or Josh Farmer. So he's seeing the best of the ACC in these practices. I want to see what he looks like against, not to knock the competition. I want to just see what he looks like against the rest of the conference in games. But yeah, I think Richie's considerably ahead of Bryson Estes, not in a negative way against Bryson. No. It's just Richie is a good find out of the portal.
Yeah, and Bryson, I believe, was somewhat limited early in camp, but he did finish camp strong. And listen, it's good that you got a guy that's you need to count on as a backup. Finished his camp off better than he started, and of course, listen, I think they've been trying to replace this guy for 4 years, and nobody's figured out a way to do it. Maurice Smith is back at center, his redshirt senior year, and he is going to be backed up by either Andre Otto, and you're going to hear a lot of backed up by Andre Otto right now, because I think he could end up anywhere on the right side as a backup. But he's backed up by Andre Otto and Jacob Rizzi, and they are ored on the depth chart, so it could be Otto or Rizzi. Listen, Mark, I know you have a lot of respect for Maurice, and from what we've seen in camp, you would not be disappointed. And I do want to ask you this. Obviously, Florida State's going to be without their offensive line coach, Alex Atkins, for the first 3 games of the year on game day. He'll be allowed to be at practice and at meetings and even with the team on the road. in Ireland. But how important is it having Darius Washington and Maurice Smith anchor this offensive line particularly when you're going to be without your primary offensive line coach? Now, Gabe, is it Farida? I think it's Farida.
I think it's Fertitta, but I'm not.
Fertitta
not exactly sure.
is the senior analyst for offense, and he's going to be the guy that's going to pick up the slack for Alex. But how important is it to have Darius and Maurice without Alex being there in Dublin on the sidelines anyway?
Yeah, I mean, to have that experience, however many hundreds of snaps those guys had for this team in this system, it is a measure of security that you feel going in without having the offensive line coach there. I mean, so what function does Alex Atkins serve on game day? Well, obviously he's the offense coordinator. So, but he's getting information from probably Gabe. I'm sure Alex was watching his, from his perspective on the field, and I imagine Gabe was probably upstairs and getting that information and relaying it to the guys. And when the offensive line comes off the field, the first thing you always ask is, tell me what you saw, and then able to marry that up with what information you're getting from upstairs, right?
Yep.
And so, the mechanics of that probably is not going to change a whole lot as long as the eyes that are watching, you can trust them, and it sounds like they can trust them, right? And so, then couple that with the experience that these guys have about being able to make adjustments, being able to make adjustments in real time on the field without even coming to the sideline,
right,
is huge. And and back to my original point early in the podcast about where's the leadership going to come from. It's this group. It's those guys. These guys are the core of the team. And it kind of reminds me of like that 87 team that I was on when we had a bunch of senior offensive linemen was the core of the team and had a lot of success. You can do that with offensive linemen as big personalities and as being the core of the team. And I do feel very good about that. I love Darius. I love Maurice, Rob Scott being there, and even KJ and Jeremiah have been there a whole year, and with the amount of snaps that they've gotten, that's really good experience in this day and time, especially. So yeah, you got to feel good about, even though Alex is not going to be there, about that, the mechanics of that, and also, the experience that they bring.
Yeah, and I do think it's going to be interesting to see who would go in if Maurice were to need to get spelled for whatever reason, because we've seen Richie Leonard take snaps at center this camp. We've seen Andre Otto, Jacob Rizzi, among others. So I think that's going to be interesting. On the right side of the line, you got Keandre Jones or TJ Ferguson at right guard. I think it's Keandre all the way, Bob. I don't know what you think. And I think that both of them better keep eye on number 65 because he's coming, and that's Andre Otto. But
here's the thing about those middle three. I mean, you look at the mass of these guys. Richard Leonard, I mean, the rest is 331, 337, 330. Otto's 325.
Yep.
Look, if Keandre Jones is 337, then I'm 280. Okay. Those are some massive dudes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm excited to see them move guys out of the way, and hopefully we get a good dose of that with those three guys. I mean, I think Georgia Tech has a 6'7" guy that's kind of a Daryl Jackson looking kind of guy on the line, right? I think some of the teams we play maybe not quite, especially in these first 5 games. I'd expect those guys to really be able to move guys out of the way, because here's the deal: until the passing game is proven, people are going to be stacking the box. They're going to make us throw the ball. They're going to, and as big and as good as those guys are, they can't block 2 guys at the same time. So if they try to outnumber us in the box, but now that's where your running backs come in, make a guy miss, right?
Yeah. So
I'm excited to see how this running game manifests itself, how they scheme it formationally, how they, with blocking schemes, and with the experience that we have up front, all across the board, being able to adjust on the run ought to be something that they'd be very good at.
Yeah, and then of course at right tackle you got Byers back as the incumbent starter, and he's going to be backed up by Robert Scott or Jalen Early. Listen, I think we had high expectations for Byers coming into last season. I know that he, struggled at times. He's looked good in camp. He's held up well against Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones Jr. and particularly in the pass protection drills I've seen. But and then of course you got Robert Scott, who's got well over 1,000. I think he may have 2,000 snaps as a college football player. No, he's got over 1,000 for sure. And he's listed as the backup, and then Jalen Early as a redshirt sophomore. We'll see how that works out as the season progresses. But, I agree. I think this is offense is going to be dominated by the run game, particularly early as the receivers find their way. And Mike finds out what works best for DJ once they get into gameplay. And listen, we have seen it since Mike got here in 2020 when he took over a depleted roster. But this 2020 roster and that 2021 roster were not great. And we saw him maximize the production to the extent that he could, because he's a very creative play caller and knows how to coach around deficiencies or weaknesses. And I think that the fact that he's got such a chance to have such a strong running game gives him time to figure out what is best to do in the passing game. And I think it will naturally open up some opportunities in the passing game. And we know he's going to use motion and RPO and play action and all that. So I do think the offense as a whole will get going as the season goes on. And I think, the offensive line is going to be probably the major reason. I do think this is the engine that's going to drive this offense, as opposed to last year when it was the skill players that were kind of the engine of the offense, until this receiver group grows up and they find out who the top, 3, 4, 5 guys are in that passing attack outside of tight end. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this works. I think we'd be being a disservice to say that is we have more questions on offense probably right now than we do on defense, and we still think Florida State will be good on offense as long as Mike Norvell's the head coach. I don't doubt that they will. Don't doubt for a second that they won't be good. I mean, they will be good. It's just a matter of hey, we're comparing it to last year's offense, right? Where we were talking about coming out of camp. I remember walking out of camp with you, Kurt, and Jerry, Bob, and we were talking about who the hell is going to, stop this offense from scoring 40 points a game. The first game of the year, they go out and hang 45 on LSU, and offense was pretty good until obviously Jordan Travis got hurt against North Alabama. So, they had a couple of tough games, but it's pretty good offense. So we'll see what happens with FSU's offense. But just to be clear, we are not down on FSU's offense. We were just breaking down what we saw in camp. And listen, we think Florida State's going to have a fine offense. It's just not going to be. It's going to be a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, particularly compared to last year and the year before that. And listen, I do think if we had one question about the offensive line, Mark, it would be, how will pass protection hold up as well without a mobile quarterback? Listen, and I think that's a question that everybody has, right? You don't have Jordan Travis anymore. He was very good at making plays out of nothing, very good at getting away from pressure. I think that's are they able to be highly efficient in pass blocking situations with a quarterback that's not a statue, but certainly not Jordan Travis?
Yeah, well, look, pass protection is more than just the offensive line. It's a coordination between the whole offense. It's making sure the quarterback makes sure the offensive line slides the right way, when they point them out. Who's blocking who, back coordination with the backs, hots with the receivers, quarterback going the right place, with not holding on the ball if there's a free runner. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it in terms of pass protection. It's not just the matchups one-on-one with the offensive line. So, again, the experience up front, DJ's experience in playing in a lot of different schemes, but understanding, the structure of a defense and making sure everybody goes the right way. I think that you can't discount that from a fifth-year senior, at quarterback. I mean, I think that's an important thing too. So, yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. One thing I am very, very, very confident of is that, this offense will reflect the talent that we have and take advantage of the matchups that we're going to have. And from the sounds of it, it sounds like it's going to come a lot from the backfield and the slots, early on.
Yep.
And I have great confidence, because look, you remember 2 years ago, when Jordan was first finding his feet. I mean, that offense looked a lot different than it did the last half of the year, and even the year. We were all amazed on the 10-win season year that Jordan didn't run near as much as he did, and then last year Jordan only had 400 yards rushing last year or something like that.
It wasn't what we were normally accustomed to. You're right.
Exactly.
I remember I don't remember what the grand
It
total
was like 400 yards, and he had 7 touchdowns, right? And so that brings me back to the other point about this offense, and the thing we've been excellent at, and that's a red zone offense, converting our chances, making touchdowns, with a big offensive line and a lot of the skill that we have, the guys that can move around real fast in small spaces when that field gets compressed. How is Mike going to scheme this offense in order to score touchdowns? And I have tremendous confidence that we'll be good at that again.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's one of the strengths. He's always, if you go back to his Memphis days, the year he had the 3 Tony Pollard and Antonio Gibson, and weren't as talented at wide receiver as they were running back this year. And I think he was 8th in the nation that year in rushing offense. And obviously he's a balanced guy, but he does love to run the ball. And I think we could see. I don't know what year that was, but I think you could see a similar type situation where Florida State is one of the better teams in the country. I'm talking like top 10, like they were that particular year. So, and I think that is his strength, is he is a excellent in-game play caller and really keeps defenses on their toes. I mean, I've seen when Shane was coaching at UCF, that's my brother. He said Mike used to give him fits, trying to prepare for him. So I agree with you there. All right, so let's move over to the defense. And listen, guys, I think this, Bob, I know that you think the same thing. This has a chance to be a very good defense. And I think it's can't believe I was going to say this before the season. I wouldn't have said this before the season started, but I think this front four and potentially 2 deep at defensive line could be as good, if not better, as last year's. And, that's saying something when you're talking about a defensive that lost Braden Fisk and Jared Verse to the LA Rams in the draft, 2 pretty good front 4 guys themselves. But, Darrell Jackson, we've waited patiently, a year and a half since he arrived on campus, maybe close to 2. And he is getting ready to step on the field for the first time. And we've actually seen days where he could not be blocked if he did not want to be blocked. Then Josh Farmer looks like he's ready to have a breakout year. Patrick Payton, obviously, this is he's the leader of this defensive front. He's the most well-known name on that defensive front. Gerald Jackson may be by the time we get to midseason. And then you got Marvin Jones Jr., who, listen, I'm not going to sit. We dampened everybody's expectations of Jared Verse after Jermaine Jones because we said, you can't have another Jermaine Jones 2 years in a row. And Jared comes out and proves everybody wrong, has 2 great seasons before being drafted in the first round. And I don't think we knew what to think about Marvin because of how he was used at Georgia in a more of a 3-4 odd-based system where he played more outside linebacker than defensive end. But I've been pleasantly surprised about how he's adjusted to playing full-time, hand in the ground defensive end. Just your thoughts on that front unit.
When Jerry said Darrell Jackson looks like a first-round draft pick, I kind of gave him a look. But then he said it so many times, and we've watched Darrell in practice. When we talk about who's the most improved or who's having the best camp or whatever, I bet the Florida State offensive lineman would say Darrell Jackson's having a really good camp, y'all. I mean, that guy is playing his Saturdays every day out there in practice. So I think the country might be listening or reading and saying, why is the media so high on these defensive linemen? They're not well known. Look at what they lost, but they're legitimate. And it's very consistent day in and day out. What Darrell Jackson does, Josh Farmer. I'm in love with Patrick Payton, not just the sacks, but the ability to knock down passes. I'll take 10 pass breakups and whatever sacks he gets, because a pass breakup is pretty darn good. It's not as good as a negative yardage play of a sack, but it's a 0 for the offense. I think that's a positive for the defense. Marvin, again, same thing. He looks like, what do we say, the first guy off the bus type.
Yep.
Honestly, the big question comes down to me, if you're an offense, who are you going to double? Who do you choose to double, and who do you choose to one-on-one? Even if you use a running back to chip or do something, you're going to leave some one-on-ones that are going to be very advantageous for some of these guys to capitalize on in a play-to-play situation.
Yeah, well, listen, I think what they're going to do is there gonna if I was an offensive coordinator, and I ask you this question, Mark, because you were an offensive coordinator, run game coordinator anyway. So more specifically, this question is for you. I'm of the opinion that if Georgia Tech's going to try to run the ball, or anybody else on Florida State for that matter, you're going to run it directly at Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones and run it away from Josh Farmer and Daryl Jackson and make those guys chase the ball, get them out of the game, get them gassed, make Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones prove that they can hold up against the run. I'm not saying that we have any questions that they can. I'm telling you what the thinking is by opponent's offensive coordinator. You're not going to have much success running right at Daryl Jackson. So what do? You make him run. What do? You run off tackle. You run at you try to base block up on Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones Jr. and see if they can hold up in the run game. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. When you have physical presence like that, you try to do two things as an offensive line coach: find angles or facilitate double teams. The duo play is in vogue right now, where the guard in the center and the tackle in the center, or tackle in the guard, they double the two inside guys, and you just cut off the defensive end, and or you formation it in such a way where you can facilitate double teams and make the linebackers they can't be right. That's one way you try to do it. How can I facilitate double teams on those two inside guys? The other thing you try to do is you try to find angles. So the gap schemes. Where can I get a guy blocking down on those guys where I got an angle? I can at least move him out of the way or mitigate his ability to physically. What you don't want to do is try to get some kind of one-on-one blocks. Where you're even like running an outside zone or something like that, where you got to block a guy one-on-one. You are running to the outside. A one-on-one block, if Daryl Jackson's a 3 technique, making that running back bounce it outside where the speed of the defense can get to it. That's not necessarily an answer. Is running it on corners either. I think gap schemes, facilitating double teams is the way you try to block those guys. And look, Brent Key's an offensive line coach. This is not his first go around. He's going to have a plan. It'll be interesting to see what that plan is. How he's going to get one of those two scenarios, or he has multiple ways to get those scenarios. Because that's what you're going to have to try to do.
Yeah, well, good luck to whoever's got to block number 6 and who's ever got to block the number 5.
But see, here's the thing too. We lost Burst and we lost Fisk. Those guys, and you guys can answer this question better than I can. Those guys had some motors. Those guys go all day. They played hard. They were mentally tough, right? They were hard-nosed, tough guys that worked their tails off. That's a big part of this too. We all know guys that have been real big and physical who aren't necessarily mentally tough. I'm not saying that's the case of these guys. I have no idea about them. But what I'm saying is don't discount the fact that those two guys who got drafted in the first round, they didn't get drafted in the first and second round just because of their ability. They got drafted that way because of who they are.
Well, they have very high motors.
Very high motors and very smart, disciplined football players. So that's a part of this too. I agree. Talent-wise, I think we're on par where we were last year, talent-wise. As far as the ability to play the game and do it within the scheme and do your job and do it 100% every time, that's something that's yet to be determined with this group.
Yeah, listen, I feel better about the depth at defensive tackle coming out of camp than I did going in. I think KJ Sampson's got a chance to have a really good year. Tamawia Durajay has taken the defensive tackle probably more than I expected him to after coming here as a defensive end from West Virginia. They slid him inside during the spring. He's spent the whole fall camp inside. And listen, he and KJ Sampson work. Talk about motors. I think those two guys have motors. And then, of course, you got Daniel Lyons and Grady Kelly at the other side. Bob, how do you feel about that just as a whole? How you feel about the depth at defensive tackle?
I feel like it's a good rotation, and Odell typically wants 4, sometimes more, and it's the same way at defensive end. It's 4 with a floating 5th guy who can almost kind of be either edge. I think to some extent we're talking a little bit about the 2025 starting defensive lineman when you mention a KJ Sampson and a Tommy, I'll call him Tommy Durajay. I think this staff is lining up the talent, the guys to get the reps now in a rotational role, but knowing they're going to have an expanded role once a Daryl Jackson and a Josh Farmer are in our estimation, going to be off to the NFL after this year.
Yep. Now, I think the biggest question we had coming into this camp as far as defense is concerned was the linebacker group. I think that everybody at the Osceola staff, I'll speak for most of them, they can correct me in writing if they want later, but I think most of us feel better about the linebacker group. Listen, I think it's I put this in the takeaways article. I think Josh Farmer and Gerald Jackson are the keys, because they're both great individual players and they can be very disruptive, but their job is to also free up those linebackers. And I think as camp went along, that linebacker group got much better than I thought they could. I think Cam Riley was a very pleasant surprise because I don't think we knew if they knew how to use them, where they were going to use them. I mean, I always thought they were going to use them at will, or the speed line, what I call the speed linebacker for Florida State. And so he and Blake Nicholson are listed as oars. They both got stronger camps as it went on. And then you got DJ Lundy back at the Mike linebacker position, backed up by Omar Graham and Justin Cryer. I think there's some questions, particularly with Blake. He's still young. How does he respond when the lights come on? When the job is his, he's carrying the load along with Cam Riley. But I thought both those guys, Bob, had great, finished off great in camp. Listen, got to get it done on game day. But I think the green dots going on Riley and maybe Lundy, or Riley and Nicholson, I can't remember. But I thought Riley, for a guy that we weren't sure whether they were going to take him at one time, he's been probably one of the better surprises of camp.
Yeah, I think we almost stereotyped that a defensive guy at 6'4" might not move that well because we figured he would have been on offense. Somebody would have moved him to that side of the ball. Cam Riley moves really well at 6'4", the way he can range and get to the sideline and make a tackle. It will be very interesting. Adam Flora calls it the green dot. Who wears the dot as far as that helmet communication? I'll be curious because the equipment staff has to make sure there's only one dot in the game at a time. Okay. Who has that specific helmet? Who do you use? When Lundy's not in the game, is that going to be Cam Riley? Is a guy with not a spring of experience going to be capable in communicating what Adam Fuller is saying to his teammates? And as Adam rightfully said, the defensive players, the other 10 guys, have to know to shut up and listen to that dot linebacker when he's talking. It's going to be an interesting dynamic, but I do think we really feel better about Riley. I think from the start, we've liked Blake, knowing he's a developmental guy, knowing he was more of a runner, running back type coming out of high school who played some safety and such. But if you're looking at development for the rest of the year in the future, I do think Blake's a guy they've invested a lot of energy in, and he's going to be a guy for him for sure.
Yeah, and listen, both those guys run really well. I think that's their the strength of their game. And listen, it's going to be hard to replace Kalen DeLoach, but who's, by the way, seems to be having a really good camp in Tampa Bay from what JP told me on his show yesterday. So you're replacing what seems to be a NFL quality linebacker there. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think, we'll see about depth behind those three. I think that's the question there. You would think Omar Graham is ready to take this, and Justin Cryer for that matter, ready to take the next step in their development. And we've all said that Justin has some natural football instincts. So, I think you'll see both of those guys play better than they did last year just because they're a year older, and they'll get more reps this year than they did last year. And then, of course, I think, Bob, I think you could say that you feel as good about the two cornerback spots as you about the two defensive tackle spots. Azaria Thomas and Fintrell Cypress have had great camps. Fintrell looks like the guy that we thought Florida State was going to get when he came out of Virginia as an all-AC selection. But just your thoughts on the corners as a whole.
Yeah, I didn't expect Fentrell to be that good, that consistent day in, day out, but he kind of picked up where he left off toward the end of last year. It got better as his season progressed. If Fentrell is this good throughout the year, again, I'm very loath to use the term lockdown corner because everybody's giving up something, But this defense set a high standard last year with different guys, held the opposing quarterbacks under 50% passing for the year. I don't know if that's repeatable, but that's almost a benchmark that I think I'll be very curious to see where this pass defense sits at the end of the year. If it's close to that, it's because AZ is the corner that this staff thinks he is, potentially an All-American, and Fentrell is really a guy who you can't throw it his way so much just because the passer's looking to see where AZ is and saying, well, I'll just kind of pick on Fentrell. If you can't pick on one or the other, then you're starting to look at the slots and figuring out what's open over the middle. But we feel really good about AZ and Fentrell.
Yeah, I think the one depth chart item that caught my eye on defense, which I was not expecting, was the nickel position where Kevin Knowles and Earl Little are named as co-starters. The takeaway going even back to last year by most of the people that cover Florida State was this was going to be a runaway. Earl Little was going to win this job. He's going to be an All-American. Unless he may be. He was highly thought of coming out of high school, signed with Alabama. He's looked good at times, no doubt about that. But were you as surprised as I was when that was an or position? Because Kevin Knowles did not have a great year last year, particularly as a tackler, but he's had a good camp.
I would say Kevin Knowles had some days in Jacksonville that really impressed me, and this was almost a forgotten guy going into camp, because when they lost Greedy, you thought, well, it's going to become Earl Little's job. It's going to almost be locked in over the summer. It definitely hasn't been locked in. I won't say Earl was as consistent or as good as the other corners, as the other safeties. It's good to have this kind of competition. I also wonder if the coaches aren't just kind of saying, well, Kevin's a senior. He's stuck it out. Let's put him atop the depth chart in an or. It's a nice little kind of pat on the back for a guy like Kevin. I think coaches do this publicly with the way depth charts have become. We'll see who really truly starts, who gets the most reps, play counts. But I think it does speak to some extent. They feel they know what Kevin can do as a nickel. It didn't work at safety. They might think it can still work at nickel to a high level.
Well, the truth of the matter is we need both those guys, right?
Yeah.
And there's by putting it as an or thing, it is what it is. They're both going to play, and they're both going to play significant snaps in that position. So, really saying, well, you're the starter really doesn't mean much this day of time.
No.
With much substitution as there is. And I think that's kind of the message that they send with these depth charts with all the ors, is that these guys have earned the right to play, and they're going to play. Who starts the game or whatnot is really insignificant, because what the bigger thing is, when it comes time, it's 3rd and 6 in the fourth quarter in a one-score game. Who's the guy in the game?
Right.
And that'll tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, and we've got the same situation at free safety with Miami transfer Devontae Brown listed as a co-starter with Conrad Hussey. Listen, I thought they both had good camps. I think we all thought Conrad might, after what we saw from Conrad last year, he had some really great moments in games last year. I thought he might win this job outright. But as Mark says, you do see more rotation in college football than you ever have in the history of the game. They're trying to keep people fresh, and with spread offenses where you're being asked to run all over the field, it's probably
and play 16 games.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to feel like you have two starters there at free safety. What were your thoughts on the kind of camp Brown and Hussey had?
Yeah, I don't think there was a ton of separation. I probably expected maybe Conrad to take a more significant second step. Didn't see that just yet through the practices. Again, would have loved to have paid to get in to watch those scrimmages. I would have probably paid good money to watch some of these guys in a scrimmage situation. But I think, Mark, to your point, Adam Fuller was asked the other day about how many defensive players do you think you can get out there in terms of depth? And I think the question was 20 to 25. Yeah. And Adam pretty quickly kind of said, 20, 21. And he started going through a couple of the positions as far as what it would look like up front. But yes, I think you're very much right. This is going to be a deep defense. And you're going to see in those pressure moments, who they feel they can count on as most dependable. But it's a good thing to have 20 plus guys out there to keep them fresh. It's going to be hot in a lot of these games, not in Ireland. It's going to be really hot. You're going to have to keep guys pretty fresh out there rotating.
Yep. Yeah. Then of course, strong safety, or what FSU calls the buck position. You've got Shaheem Brown. No surprise there. He's coming back as, I guess, what is his third year as a full-time starter or co-starter in this defense. And you got KJ Kirkland behind him, who I think we all think has a very high upside. So listen, Bob, do you feel like, and it doesn't really matter, I don't guess, we both feel like they're deep position groups, but do you think the secondary is the deepest position on defense, or deepest position group, I should say?
I would say, if you're looking at, I would almost take that defensive line. I really like that defensive line, end and tackle, but there's nothing wrong with these DBs. I think, as Adam Fuller said a couple times, when you don't make mistakes in recruiting, you get this level of talent, this level of depth, where it's the high school kids, it's the transfers. I don't think they've really missed on the DBs. There's guys who maybe aren't developing as rapidly as you might want based on, say, where they were with the star ratings. You might think a guy should be a little bit faster to get on the field, but there's just so much depth of talent at these positions on defense, especially the front and the secondary.
Yep. Yeah. Well, listen, they're very deep at most positions. It's going to be a fascinating team to watch this year. I'm so glad we're about 4 days away from kickoff. Florida State's going to practice tomorrow here in Tallahassee, then head to Ireland. They're going to fly overnight. They're going to leave here 9 p.m. tomorrow night, land at 10 a.m. on Thursday Ireland time, and they're going to keep the kids up. They got to get their sleep on the plane. I hope they give there's a space between every seat on the plane so these guys can get comfortable on their way over. But going to give them melatonin and all that stuff I've read. Try to get them some extra sleep on the plane over, get up, go straight to practice, and try to keep them up as a normal day. And I believe Georgia Tech's got a similar schedule, if I'm not confused. So I think that would probably at least some of the travel stuff will equal out as they both head to Ireland. Mark, when are you headed to Ireland?
Same time, 9:00 tomorrow night.
All right. Well, listen, I got a question for you. I sent you an email. You didn't send it back, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Vegas, and of course you may defer out of this question, which is your right, but Vegas has the over-under for wins for Florida State at 9.5. Are you going over or under this year?
So I'm looking at the schedule. Let me start off by saying this: 13-0 is a rare thing. We've done it 4 times in the program's history, right? 3 of those times we won. 2 of those times we won the national championship. 2 of those times we should have. One of those times we should have played. The other time we got upset in the Orange Bowl, right? So those are rare things. So do I expect to go 13-0? The history would tell you probably not, right? So then I look at the schedule. I look at the first 5 games. Now, travel aside, with going to Dublin and coming back and then playing the next week, right? But your weaker teams are in those first 5 games, right? So Tech, Boston College, Memphis, Cal, and SMU. That gives us a chance to grow and to iron the things out we need to iron on offense to get better, right? I would hope we go with that stretch 5-0. And now you got Clemson at home, who's got a roster comparable to ours, a quarterback that has some questions still, maybe a little younger, maybe not the depth we have, and that might be a thing at that time of year. But to me, that's a point flip game. Then you got Duke, who I don't think are going to be as good as they were last year. And then you got Miami, who everybody is, everything you're hearing is that they really like their team. They're going to be really good.
Yeah, they're back again for the 16th year in a row.
Well, yeah, but I think this time it feels a little different. I think their roster is a little bit stronger, a lot stronger. They got a legitimate quarterback. They got a really, really good running back. And so, I mean, that's another coin flip game, honestly. North Carolina, they lose Drake May. They're not going to be as strong as in Tallahassee. I expect that to win that. Notre Dame away. That's going to be a game that's going to be a tough game. we'll see later on in the year, what these teams look like. But I'm going to make that a coin flip game. And then we get, I guess, not Coastal Carolina.
Charleston Southern.
Charleston Southern, and then the Gators. Now, the Gators, a rivalry game. You would say it's a coin flip game, but that's going to be at the end of their gauntlet run, and their depth is going to be challenged at the end of that run. In Tallahassee, I expect to win that one. So my coin flip games really are Miami and Clemson. And if we avoid stumbling in Notre Dame, Miami, Clemson, Notre Dame, those are your coin flip games. Can we win 2 of those? I hope so.
So you're taking
all that to say this. I'm going to say over. I'm going to say 10 or 11.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Listen, and we're going to get some firsthand intel tomorrow on Cam Ward in Miami and Florida, because we're going to have our guest is scheduled to be CBS football analyst Kevin Carter from Lincoln High School, not from the University of Florida, from Tallahassee Lincoln High School. That's why he's on the show. We've known each other since I was a senior and he was a freshman. He was coming on. I've talked to him a little bit about Miami, Florida. He's also been to Florida State's practice. So we're going to get a little breakdown from Kevin on the Sunshine State as a whole and what Florida State fans should anticipate seeing from Florida and Miami later in the year. Of course, as you said, there's a lot of road to hoe. The rosters could look a lot different, and 2 deeps could look a lot different with injuries and those kind of things. So we'll see what happens. Now, listen, it's going to be an interesting year in college football, Mark. I won't talk to you until after the season started. So, I've already started my college football playoff thoughts and things and how it's going to work and all these things. It's already going through my head. We know the ACC champ is going. We know the SEC champ is going. Big 10, Big 12, Group of 5, highest rated Group of 5 champion. Those 5 spots are going. So it's going to be interesting each week to see how we look at one loss to the other. But, my question is, let's just assume that Florida State finishes second in the ACC. Is there a chance that there would be a second? Can a second ACC team get in the college football playoff, and what does that look like? I think it's got to have. I think they got to have 2 10-win teams to get 2 teams in the playoff. Now we don't know what this going to look. I mean, there could be outside of Georgia, there could be absolute carnage in the SEC, and Georgia may end up getting dinged a couple of times, but you could have the SEC second place team with 3 losses. I mean, you look at some of these schedules, and listen, most of these preseason polls and conference champions are done on brand, not study, not identity. No one's going, I guarantee you it's Georgia and Alabama, just about everybody's preseason poll for the championship game, or Georgia, Texas. It's FSU, Clemson, and just about everybody's preseason poll for the ACC. It's Ohio State, Oregon, and just about everybody's preseason poll for the championship game in the Big 10. And it's probably Utah and Oklahoma State, or Utah and we know it's not Colorado in the Big 12. So I think most of these it's just picking the biggest brands at each conference and saying, hey, that's who's going to make it. So we really don't know what this is going to end up looking like, but I do think that regardless of who it is, the SEC will get minimum 2 teams in. Big 10 will get a minimum. Whoever's in their championship games are going in.
See, I think Big 10 and SEC get 3.
Well, then it gets harder for the ACC.
That's what I think, because you add USC, Oregon, and UCLA in the Big 10. You add Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC, and those are quality teams. Yep. There's going to be multiple lost teams, I think, in both conferences that have played really good schedules and will have quality losses, right?
Exactly. Yep. Quality losses.
They're going to have the quality loss, their perceived quality loss. And so we don't have that luxury in the ACC. And therein lies the issue, right? Is the perceived quality loss. And so I expect those 2 to get 3. We may get 2 depending on the situation. Hopefully, the one that the second team would have to be one that is probably in the conference game or maybe missed the conference. If say us, Miami and Clemson are, 1-loss teams but only one can play in the championship, the one that's out may be able to slide in if it's a quality loss to one of the 2 that played in the championship game. I don't know. But there's no way 3 in the ACC are going in. I can tell you that.
No, I agree with you on that. It's something weird would have to happen in the SEC and Big Ten for that to happen, but and I don't think they would let it happen anyway. But yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. Now, listen, I want to ask you both this question. All right, do we even need championship games anymore? Should they just add a 13th game to the schedule and forget the bye? And
Money.
Right. Yeah, I know, but what? All right, so what happens if a guy goes, well, listen, we're in the playoff. I'm gonna use a lot of rep management in the championship game. I'm gonna make sure I'm healthy regardless of how many games I have to play in the anybody gonna do that? I mean, could you guys see that, or is that just the bye is so important that they're gonna give everything, they're gonna sacrifice everything to get the bye?
You know what? That's an interesting point. I think back to last year. Now, imagine Texas was in the SEC last year, right? Georgia and Alabama play. Alabama wins. Georgia would be in a 12-team playoff, but with Texas, maybe that'd be 4, right? Yeah. That would be 4. And who has the advantage? Well, not the 2 teams that play in the championship game, right? And you can see the same sort of scenario when you include Oregon. With Ohio State, Michigan, one other. You're talking. It'll be interesting to see how those teams that get in that didn't play in the championship game fare. And I think after this year, you may see some kind of strategic or some kind of discussion about how much do we need? Because here's the thing. Yeah, Bob, there's money involved in those championship games for sure. But are those would the conferences rather make the playoff, be in the playoff? Would that money offset the loss that you would have if you got rid of the championship game? That would be the question.
Well, I think you would make more money off. How there are 18 teams in the SEC? I think you would even out over 9 games, 13. Yeah. If you had if everybody's playing 13 ball games, you'd offset the loss of the conference championship money by pooling all the money together from all those extra games. So, listen, I think this system is no more perfect this year than it was last. I mean, it's an imperfect system. I mean, listen, it's not right that somebody's going to get a bye. You shouldn't get a bye. It should be 16 teams. If it's going to,
it should be the better teams get the bye, not the worst teams.
Yeah.
Not the less.
Well, I'm just saying, but I mean, it should not. Why should anybody get? I mean, why would you all play the same number of games, right? I mean, Notre Dame's going to get in without if they get finished in the top 11, they're going to get in without a championship game. I think they've got to get it to where everybody's playing the same number of games, and I think you got to get it to where there's not a bye in the playoffs. They don't do that at Division. I don't think they do that at Division I AA level. I want to say it's 16 teams from the start, and it's done. So I think, listen, it's still, and somebody's still going to get left out. Probably that should have gotten in. We're going to see that again this year. Just the specifics, details around it will be different. Number 13. Listen, you're going to get what? Let's just say that Memphis wins the AAC, but they're ranked not 20, 21, 22, 23, and how does that team that is just competed in the SEC, Big Ten, ACC that just finished 12th in the polls, they get left out of the playoff? So, and in a 12-team playoff, you can make the argument that they would have had a chance if you take the best 12 teams, that team would have had a chance. So it's an imperfect system. We're going to be, and it's going to make for great water cooler conversation. It's going to make for great weekly conversation, but it's just as imperfect a playoff format as last year's. When you go, and I don't want to get into the snub necessarily, but when that system was set up, you had 5 power conferences, P5s, and you only had 4 spots for them. So there was always a chance that something like last year was going to happen. And it just happened to affect Florida State. But it was an imperfect system then,
Look,
it's an imperfect system now.
I think if you look back pre-playoff in BCS, the question of who was one, who was two, it was always who's that third team, right? But nobody ever thought that the fourth team was the best team, right? It was always that third team was the best team.
Right.
More times than not, it was pretty close to right. I feel, but that third team could have done it, but nobody argued the fourth, fifth, or sixth team was one of the better teams. Once all the dust settles over the course of 12 games, 12, 13 games, once the dust settles, you pretty much know who the best 2 or 3 teams are. To take it all the way to 12 to me was a little bit silly. Anyway.
No, I think that was because of money.
100% it was. 100%.
Yeah, but listen, if they're going to go to 12, go 16, right? I mean, and I think it's at some point they will go 16, particularly if we see more conference expansion. I know Kyle Whittingham came out last week and said within 4 months to 4 years, no, he said 8 months to 4 years, we will see just one big super conference. It'll be basically 40 to 60 teams, I believe is what he said. And he thinks it's coming sooner rather than later. And I think when that happens, it will go to a 16-team thing. And I know the SEC and Big Ten want to hang on to conference play and their names and all that. But I think we're headed to one huge super conference, and that's probably what it needs to be at this point. But anyway, all right, we spent too much time talking about this. We gave a good breakdown of the roster. It's going to be an exciting time, Mark. We are happy to have you back. Look forward to seeing you on a regular basis. Mark will join me on most Saturdays for first impressions, instant reaction to post-game coverage. He may or may not be with us this week on Saturday afternoon, depending on connections on Dublin from Dublin, and of course how many Guinness Mark has had and all those things. Right now, former FSU defensive analyst Shane Burnham, who coached at UCF, Rutgers, Iowa State, Richmond, Elon, various other places. He is set to join us and will join us with Mark try to join us with Mark each and every week for post-game coverage. And then we will obviously be back tomorrow with a little Kevin Carter segment. And then Bob and I will be back, or whoever's at practice will be back for a little post-practice breakdown. It won't be much because we won't see a whole lot. They'll be going against the scout team, and we can't talk much about that, but we will talk about what little we can. And then we will be back Thursday, hopefully with Charles Fishbein, and talk a little bit Florida State recruiting and where they go, both at the offensive line and defensive back positions, as they look for an offensive tackle and a couple of corners and safeties after Bryce Fitzgerald and Josh Petty commit elsewhere over the last week. But please check, if you're not an Osceola subscriber, please check us out at theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. If you're not a Osceola YouTube subscriber, please hit the YouTube subscribe button and the notification button so that you get updates when we go live or have taped shows. And we will be back tomorrow and Thursday, and look forward to seeing you then. Bob, Mark, appreciate it, bud.
Go Knowles.